The beauty found in the workshop of Raffaello, Florence's most famous sculptor, was astonishing. Hundreds of perfect statues of women looking as if they were alive. No one knew how such realism was possible until someone discovered that they were actually made from real human faces. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from all corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background, and let's begin our journey together tonight. The morning sun cast long shadows through the narrow windows of the Visconti family workshop, illuminating marble dust that danced in golden shafts of light like tiny spirits celebrating the birth of beauty from stone. In this sanctuary of artistic creation, where 3 generations of sculptors had transformed raw marble into expressions of divine perfection, 7-year-old Raffaello Visconti made his first cut into a piece of Carrara marble, and in that moment discovered both his destiny and his curse. The boy's hands, still small and soft with childhood, seemed to possess an otherworldly understanding of form and proportion that defied his tender years. Where other children might see only cold stone, Raffaello perceived faces trapped within the marble, waiting for liberation through his tools. His early attempts at sculpture revealed a natural talent so extraordinary that his father, Master Giuseppe Visconti, could only watch in amazement as his son created works that surpassed those of apprentices with years of training. Yet even in these earliest manifestations of his gift, there was something unsettling about young Raffaello's artistic vision. His sculptures possessed a quality of hyperrealism that made observers feel as though they were being watched by the stone figures. The eyes he carved seemed to follow viewers as they moved around the pieces, while the expressions he achieved carried emotional depths that suggested actual consciousness rather than mere artistic representation. Raffaello's obsession with capturing perfect beauty began during his 10th year, when he witnessed the death of his younger sister Margherita from a fever that had swept through Florence like an angel of death, claiming children with seemingly random cruelty. As the girl lay dying, her face still retaining its childish perfection despite the ravages of illness, Raffaello found himself studying her features with an intensity that disturbed the adults who kept vigil at her bedside. The moment that would define the rest of Raffaello's existence came as Margherita drew her final breath. In the seconds following her death, he observed something that would haunt and inspire him for the remainder of his life. The exact instant when beauty departed from her face, leaving behind something that was recognizably his sister, yet fundamentally different. The animation that had made her features so captivating simply vanished, as if some essential element had been withdrawn, never to return. From that day forward, Raffaello became obsessed with the ephemeral nature of beauty and the tragedy of its inevitable loss to time, disease, and death. He spent countless hours studying living faces, memorizing the subtle play of light and shadow that gave features their vitality, analyzing the microscopic movements that differentiated a living countenance from a death mask. His notebooks filled with sketches that captured not just physical characteristics but the intangible quality that made faces beautiful rather than merely attractive. His formal artistic education began at age 12, when he was accepted into the workshop of Master Lorenzo Benedetti, whose reputation for training the most skilled sculptors in Florence was surpassed only by his demand for absolute perfection from his students. Under Benedetti's tutelage, Raffaello's natural talent was refined through rigorous study of classical techniques, intensive practice in proportion and anatomy, and exposure to the works of the greatest artists of his era. Yet even as Raffaello mastered the technical aspects of sculpture with unprecedented speed, his fellow students and instructors began to notice disturbing aspects of his artistic approach. While other apprentices struggled to achieve basic likenesses in their work, Raffaello seemed capable of capturing not just appearance, but something approaching the actual essence of his subjects. His portrait busts possessed a quality of presence that made them appear almost alive, yet they also carried an undertone of melancholy that suggested their subjects were somehow imprisoned within the stone. Master Benedetti himself became increasingly uncomfortable with his most talented pupils' methods and results. During private conversations with Raffaello, he attempted to understand the source of the boy's extraordinary abilities, only to discover that his student's artistic vision was guided by philosophical concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of beauty and its relationship to mortality. Raffaello's emerging artistic philosophy centered on the belief that true beauty was too precious to be allowed to fade naturally through the processes of aging and death. He viewed conventional portraits and sculptures as inadequate attempts to preserve beauty, arguing that traditional methods captured only superficial appearance while the essential qualities that made faces genuinely beautiful remained beyond the reach of ordinary artistic techniques. The breakthrough that would eventually lead to Raffaello's most dangerous innovations came during his 15th year, when he was commissioned to create a memorial sculpture of a wealthy merchant's daughter who had died unexpectedly from a riding accident. The girl, Beatrice Gonzaga, had been renowned throughout Florence for her extraordinary beauty, and her grieving father demanded a monument that would preserve her memory for posterity. Raffaello's initial attempts to create Beatrice's memorial from memory and existing portraits proved frustratingly inadequate. Despite his technical mastery and artistic vision, he found himself unable to capture the quality that had made the girl so captivating during her lifetime. The sculptures he produced were technically perfect, but lacked the animating spark that had distinguished Beatrice from other beautiful women of her generation. His solution to this creative challenge would establish the pattern that would guide all his future work. Rather than continuing to rely on memory and secondary sources, Raffaello convinced Beatrice's father to allow him to study her preserved remains, arguing that direct observation of her actual features would enable him to achieve the accuracy and emotional impact that the memorial deserved. The hours Raffaello spent studying Beatrice's face in death provided him with insights that would fundamentally alter his understanding of the relationship between beauty and mortality. He observed that while death had indeed taken something essential from her features, the physical structures that had supported her beauty remained intact and could be studied, measured, and ultimately reproduced with perfect accuracy. More significantly, Raffaello began to develop techniques for preserving and transferring the actual physical characteristics of his subjects, rather than simply attempting to recreate them through artistic interpretation. His methods involved creating detailed molds and impressions that captured not just the general proportions of faces, but the minute details that gave each countenance its unique character. The memorial sculpture that resulted from these innovations was unlike anything Florence had ever seen. Beatrice's marble face possessed such startling realism that viewers often gasped upon first seeing it, while the emotional impact of encountering her preserved beauty proved so powerful that many observers were moved to tears. The sculpture's success established Raffaello's reputation as an artist capable of achievements that bordered on the miraculous. Yet the true significance of this early masterpiece lay not in its public reception, but in the private revelation it provided to its creator. For the first time, Raffaello had succeeded in truly preserving beauty, rather than simply representing it. The techniques he had developed offered the possibility of rescuing perfect faces from the tragedy of inevitable decay, ensuring that their beauty would endure long after their original owners had returned to dust. The commissions that followed Beatrice's memorial confirmed Raffaello's growing reputation as Florence's most skilled portrait sculptor. Wealthy families throughout the city sought his services for commemorative works, while living subjects competed for the honor of having their features immortalized by an artist whose abilities seemed to transcend normal human limitations. During this period of growing success and recognition, Raffaello established his own workshop in a building that had previously housed a monastery, choosing the location for its extensive cellars and its separation from the busier commercial districts where his activities might attract unwanted attention. The workshop's public areas were designed to impress potential clients with displays of his finest works, while the private spaces were configured for activities that required absolute secrecy. It was in this private sanctuary that Raffaello began developing the advanced techniques that would eventually make his true masterpiece possible. His study of preservation methods progressed beyond simple mold making into areas that combined artistic skill with knowledge borrowed from medical and alchemical practices. He learned to work with substances that could maintain the integrity of organic materials indefinitely, while developing tools and procedures that allowed him to achieve levels of detail that conventional sculpture could never match. The first subject to benefit fully from these refined methods was Caterina Sforza, the 18-year-old daughter of a minor noble family whose financial difficulties had forced them to seek patronage from Florence's wealthier citizens. Caterina possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that seemed to embody all of Raffaello's ideals about feminine perfection, with features so delicate and harmonious that she appeared to have stepped from the pages of classical poetry. Raffaello's initial encounters with Caterina were conducted under the pretense of commissioning her as a model for a series of sculptures celebrating feminine virtue. He paid her family generously for her services while treating Caterina herself with the respectful courtesy appropriate to someone whose beauty deserved reverence rather than mere admiration. His behavior was so proper and his artistic reputation so distinguished that no one questioned the propriety of the arrangement. During the weeks that Caterina posed for him, Raffaello studied her face with an intensity that went far beyond normal artistic observation. He memorized every curve and angle of her features, analyzed the way light played across her skin at different times of day, and documented the subtle changes in her expression that reflected her varying moods and emotions. His notebooks filled with sketches that captured not just her appearance but the intangible qualities that made her face so extraordinarily beautiful. Yet even as Raffaello appeared to be creating conventional portrait sculptures of Caterina, he was actually preparing for something far more ambitious and dangerous. His true goal was not to represent her beauty, but to preserve it permanently, ensuring that the perfection of her face would never be lost to the inevitable processes of aging and decay that claimed all mortal beauty. The workshop sessions gradually extended in duration and frequency as Raffaello claimed that achieving adequate results required more extensive study than he had initially anticipated. Caterina, flattered by the attention of Florence's most celebrated artist and grateful for the generous payments her family received, willingly cooperated with increasingly detailed and intimate examination of her features. Raffaello's behavior during these extended sessions remained scrupulously professional, never giving Caterina or her family any reason to question his motivations or methods. He spoke eloquently about the philosophical importance of preserving beauty for future generations, presented detailed explanations of the technical challenges involved in achieving perfect likenesses, and demonstrated such obvious respect for Caterina's virtue that her parents felt completely comfortable leaving her alone with him for hours at a time. The tragic accident that claimed Caterina's life occurred during what was scheduled to be their final session together. According to Raffaello's account to the authorities, the girl had been examining some of his tools when she accidentally knocked over a container of chemicals he used for cleaning marble. The resulting spill had created fumes that overcame her before she could escape to fresh air, and despite Raffaello's desperate attempts to revive her, she had died before medical assistance could be summoned. The investigation into Caterina's death was conducted with appropriate thoroughness, but the evidence supported Raffaello's version of events completely. The chemicals found at the scene were indeed dangerous if inhaled in sufficient quantities. The positioning of the spilled containers was consistent with accidental displacement, and Raffaello's obvious grief at losing such a perfect model convinced even the most skeptical observers of his innocence in the matter. Caterina's funeral was attended by much of Florence's artistic community, who mourned the loss of someone whose beauty had inspired so many works of art. Raffaello's eulogy for the girl was particularly moving, as he spoke of her as the embodiment of all that was finest in feminine beauty and expressed his determination to complete the sculpture she had been modeling for as a memorial to her memory. What none of the mourners could have suspected was that Caterina's death had provided Raffaello with the opportunity he had been seeking throughout their entire acquaintance. In the hours following her accidental demise, before authorities arrived to investigate the circumstances, he had implemented the preservation techniques he had spent years perfecting, ensuring that her beauty would indeed be immortalized in ways that no conventional sculpture could achieve. The memorial works that Raffaello created in Caterina's honor were acclaimed as his finest achievements to date. The sculptures possessed a quality of life and emotion that surpassed even his previous masterpieces, while the accuracy of their representation seemed to capture not just Katerina's physical appearance, but the very essence of what had made her so extraordinarily beautiful. Observers who had known her in life commented that the marble version seemed more real than many living people they encountered. Yet the true significance of these memorials lay not in their public reception, but in their representation of Raffaello's first successful implementation of his revolutionary preservation methods. Hidden beneath the conventional marble surfaces were elements that no observer could detect, components that had once been part of Caterina herself, preserved through techniques that ensured her beauty would endure indefinitely. The success of this initial experiment confirmed Raffaello's belief that he had discovered the solution to beauty's greatest tragedy. No longer would perfect faces be lost forever to time and mortality. Instead, they could be preserved permanently for the appreciation of future generations, who would otherwise never have the opportunity to witness such extraordinary loveliness. As Raffaello began planning for future applications of his methods, he reflected on the philosophical significance of what he had accomplished. He had not simply created art. He had conquered death itself, at least in its capacity to destroy beauty. The faces he preserved would outlast empires and civilizations, serving as eternal testimony to the heights of perfection that human beauty could achieve. The workshop where Caterina had met her end became a shrine to this new form of artistic achievement. Her preserved beauty, hidden within sculptures that appeared conventional to casual observers, served as both inspiration and proof of concept for the more ambitious projects that Raffaello was already planning. He had taken the first step in what would become a collection of preserved perfection, a gallery of beauty that would grow to include the most extraordinary faces of his generation. Yet, even as Raffaello celebrated his breakthrough achievement, he was becoming aware of the challenges that would accompany future applications of his methods. Caterina's death, while successfully disguised as accident, had attracted enough attention to make similar incidents potentially suspicious. His future work would need to be conducted with even greater care and subtlety, requiring planning and preparation that would test all of his intellectual and creative abilities. The transformation of Raffaello from conventional artist to something far more dangerous was now complete. He had discovered his true vocation not as a creator of beauty, but as its preserver, someone whose mission was to rescue perfection from the inevitable processes of decay and loss. The techniques he had developed and the philosophical framework that justified them had turned him into a hunter whose prey was beauty itself, and whose methods would soon make him the most successful predator Florence had ever unknowingly harbored. As the first chapter of Raffaello's career as the face collector drew to its close, he stood at the threshold of achievements that would establish him as both the greatest artist of his generation and its most accomplished killer. The preservation of Caterina's beauty had been only the beginning of a campaign that would ultimately create a collection of perfect faces, each representing the pinnacle of human loveliness, each preserved forever through methods that transcended conventional understanding of both art and science. The master's obsession with beauty had found its ultimate expression, and Florence's most beautiful women were about to discover that their extraordinary faces had made them targets for someone whose appreciation of perfection knew no moral boundaries. The face collector had begun his life's work, and the city's most prized treasures, the faces of its loveliest daughters, would soon become additions to a collection that would outlast their mortal owners by centuries. The months following Caterina's tragic accident brought Raffaello a period of unprecedented artistic success and social recognition that established him as Florence's most sought-after sculptor. Yet beneath the public accolades and growing commissions, he was dedicating his true energies to perfecting the revolutionary preservation techniques that had made Caterina's memorial such an extraordinary achievement. The workshop that had once been devoted to conventional sculpture was gradually transformed into something far more sophisticated and dangerous, a laboratory where beauty could be extracted, refined, and preserved in its most perfect form. Raffaello's approach to expanding his collection required careful planning and meticulous execution that went far beyond the opportunistic circumstances that had provided him with Caterina's beauty. He could not simply wait for accidents to claim potential subjects. Instead, he needed to develop systematic methods for identifying, accessing, and ultimately acquiring the faces that met his increasingly exacting standards for preservation. The process demanded not only artistic skill, but criminal sophistication of the highest order. The first challenge Raffaello faced was establishing criteria for selecting subjects whose beauty justified the risks involved in their acquisition. His studies of Caterina had taught him that not all attractive faces possessed the essential qualities necessary for successful preservation. The ideal subjects needed to combine physical perfection with specific structural characteristics that would allow their features to maintain their beauty when subjected to his advanced techniques. His selection process began with systematic observation of Florence's female population, conducted under the guise of seeking models for various artistic projects. Raffaello attended social gatherings, religious ceremonies, and public festivals where he could study potential subjects without attracting attention to his true purposes. His artist reputation provided perfect cover for such activities, as everyone expected him to be constantly searching for inspiration and suitable subjects for his work. The detailed notebooks Raffaello maintained during this period contained far more than simple artistic sketches. Each page documented not only physical characteristics, but also behavioral patterns, social connections, and personal circumstances that might affect the difficulty of acquiring particular subjects. He noted which women lived alone or with minimal family supervision, which traveled frequently outside Florence's protective boundaries, and which possessed personalities that might make them more susceptible to manipulation. His second subject was identified during a religious festival celebrating the feast of St. Catherine, when Raffaello observed a young woman whose beauty seemed to embody all of his theoretical ideals about feminine perfection. Lucia Tornabuoni was 21 years old, the daughter of a minor branch of one of Florence's most distinguished families, whose financial circumstances had declined to the point where she was forced to work as a seamstress to support herself and her aging mother. Lucia's beauty was of the ethereal variety that seemed to glow from within, enhanced by an air of gentle melancholy that made her appear both accessible and mysteriously distant. Her features possessed the kind of mathematical harmony that Raffaello had studied in classical sculptures, while her expressions carried emotional depths that suggested a rich inner life worthy of preservation. Most importantly for his purposes, her reduced circumstances and relative isolation made her an ideal target for the kind of elaborate deception he was prepared to orchestrate. Raffaello's courtship of Lucia began with a commission that appeared to offer her both artistic recognition and financial security. He approached her with a proposal to create a series of sculptures celebrating the virtues of Christian womanhood, claiming that her face embodied the spiritual beauty that such works required. The project would involve extensive modeling sessions over several months, for which he offered payment that would solve her family's immediate financial problems, while establishing her reputation as Florence's most distinguished artist's model. Lucia's acceptance of this arrangement was motivated by necessity rather than vanity, though she could not help but feel flattered by the attention of someone whose artistic genius was recognized throughout Italy. Her mother's enthusiasm for the project was even greater, as she viewed it as a potential pathway to social advancement that might lead to marriage with someone from Florence's artistic or commercial elite. The early sessions between Raffaello and Lucia were conducted with the same professional courtesy that had characterized his work with Caterina, though his methods had become considerably more sophisticated. He had designed specialized equipment that allowed him to study facial structures with unprecedented precision, while developing techniques for documenting not just appearance, but the subtle muscular movements that gave faces their unique expressiveness. During these initial weeks, Raffaello created several conventional sculptures of Lucia that served to establish the legitimacy of their working relationship while providing him with opportunities to perfect his observational techniques. These works were so extraordinary in their realism and emotional impact that word of their creation began to spread throughout Florence's artistic community, enhancing Raffaello's reputation while attracting potential clients who hoped to commission similar works. Yet even as Raffaello appeared to be engaged in conventional artistic creation, he was actually preparing for Lucia's ultimate preservation through methods that had been refined considerably since his experience with Caterina. The chemical substances he had developed for maintaining organic materials had been improved through experimentation and study, while his tools and procedures had been enhanced to achieve even higher levels of precision and effectiveness. The workshop's hidden chambers had been expanded and equipped with apparatus that combined artistic tools with devices borrowed from medical and alchemical practices. These spaces were carefully ventilated to prevent the accumulation of dangerous fumes, while being isolated enough to ensure that activities conducted within them would not be detected by visitors to the public areas of the building. Raffaello's approach to Lucia's elimination was notably more sophisticated than the opportunistic accident that had claimed Caterina. Instead of relying on chance circumstances, he created a carefully orchestrated scenario that would provide him with both the privacy and the time necessary to implement his preservation techniques without risk of interruption or discovery. The plan involved convincing Lucia that he needed to conduct final sessions for their project in a location outside Florence, where natural lighting conditions would allow him to achieve the perfect effects he sought for his masterpieces. He described a villa in the countryside where previous artists had created their finest works, emphasizing that the trip would mark the culmination of their collaboration and would result in sculptures that would establish both their reputations permanently. Lucia's agreement to this excursion was facilitated by her mother's encouragement and her own excitement at the prospect of being part of artistic history. The arrangements Raffaello made for their travel appeared completely legitimate, involving transportation, accommodation, and supplies appropriate for an extended artistic project. His attention to detail in these preparations demonstrated the kind of meticulous planning that characterized all of his criminal activities. The villa that served as the location for Lucia's final sessions was actually a property that Raffaello had acquired specifically for such purposes, isolated enough to ensure complete privacy while being equipped with all the apparatus necessary for his advanced preservation techniques. The building's exterior maintained the appearance of a typical artist's retreat, while its cellars had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory where beauty could be extracted and refined with scientific precision. Lucia's realization that she was in mortal danger came too late for her to take effective action to protect herself. By the time she understood that Raffaello's artistic project was actually an elaborate trap, she was already too far from any potential help and too completely under his control to have any hope of escape. Her final hours were spent serving as the subject for techniques that would indeed immortalize her beauty, though not in the way she had been led to expect. The preservation of Lucia's face represented a significant advancement over Raffaello's previous work with Caterina. His improved methods allowed him to capture not only her physical features, but subtle aspects of her expressiveness that had made her face so extraordinarily beautiful during life. The results exceeded even his most optimistic expectations, producing preserved elements that could be incorporated into sculptures with unprecedented realism and emotional impact. Lucia's disappearance was explained to Florence's authorities through a carefully constructed narrative that attributed her fate to brigands who had attacked the artistic party during their return journey from the countryside villa. Raffaello's account of the incident described a savage assault that had claimed Lucia's life while he barely escaped with his own, bringing back only the completed sculptures that represented the final flowering of her modeling career. The memorial works that resulted from this supposed final collaboration were acclaimed as the finest achievements of Raffaello's career to that point. The sculptures seemed to capture not just Lucia's appearance, but her very soul, creating an emotional connection with viewers that transcended normal artistic experience. The apparent tragedy of her death added poignancy to these works that made them even more powerful in their impact on those who observed them. Yet the true significance of these memorials lay in their incorporation of preserved elements from Lucia herself, hidden within conventional marble surfaces in ways that no observer could detect. Her beauty had been successfully extracted and immortalized through techniques that ensured its preservation for centuries to come, while her mortal remains had been disposed of through methods that left no traces of their location or condition. The success of Lucia's preservation confirmed Raffaello's growing confidence in his methods, while providing him with insights that would inform future applications of his techniques. He had learned to plan more systematically, to create more convincing deceptions, and to implement his procedures with greater efficiency and effectiveness. Most importantly, he had proven that his initial success with Caterina had not been mere chance, but represented a reproducible process that could be applied to other subjects with similar results. The third addition to Raffaello's collection came through circumstances that demonstrated his increasing boldness and sophistication in identifying and acquiring suitable subjects. Francesca Pazzi was the 18-year-old daughter of a prominent merchant family whose beauty had made her one of Florence's most celebrated young women. Her engagement to a wealthy nobleman from Milan had been announced with great ceremony, and her upcoming wedding was anticipated as one of the social events of the season. Francesca's selection as a target represented a significant escalation in the risks Raffaello was prepared to accept in pursuit of his collecting goals. Her prominent social position meant that her disappearance would attract far more attention than the fates of Caterina or Lucia, while her family's wealth and connections could provide resources for more thorough investigations than he had previously faced. Yet her extraordinary beauty and the limited time remaining before her marriage made her an irresistible addition to his collection. The method Raffaello developed for acquiring Francesca required the most elaborate deception he had yet attempted, involving multiple confederates and a complex scenario that would provide him with access to his target while creating a believable explanation for her ultimate fate. The plan centered on exploiting the wedding preparations themselves, using the chaos and activity surrounding the upcoming ceremony to create opportunities for the kind of private access his methods required. Raffaello's approach to Francesca began with an offer to create a special wedding portrait that would commemorate her marriage in a way worthy of her extraordinary beauty. He presented himself to her family as an artist whose reputation was so distinguished that his services were normally available only to royalty and the highest nobility. The portrait he proposed would be a masterpiece that would become a family treasure for generations, requiring multiple sessions to achieve the perfection such an important work demanded. The Pazzi family's acceptance of this proposal was motivated by both artistic appreciation and social ambition, as commissioning Florence's greatest sculptor for such a significant work would demonstrate their taste and prosperity to all who observed the finished piece. Francesca herself was delighted at the prospect of being immortalized by an artist whose previous works had achieved such acclaim throughout Italy. The portrait sessions that followed allowed Raffaello to study Francesca's beauty with the same systematic thoroughness he had applied to his previous subjects, though the circumstances required him to work more carefully and discreetly than ever before. Her prominent social position meant that their meetings were often observed by family members or friends, requiring him to maintain perfect professionalism while conducting the detailed analysis necessary for his ultimate purposes. Yet, even under these constrained conditions, Raffaello succeeded in documenting every aspect of Francesca's extraordinary face, creating records that would allow him to preserve her beauty with the same precision he had achieved with Caterina and Lucia. His notes from this period reveal a level of obsessive detail that went far beyond normal artistic observation, encompassing measurements, color analyses, and structural studies that provided a complete blueprint for preservation. The culmination of Raffaello's plan came during the final portrait session, scheduled for the day before Francesca's wedding ceremony. He had convinced her family that this timing was essential for capturing the special glow that brides possessed on the eve of their marriages, while the scheduling also provided him with the last opportunity to implement his preservation techniques before she became unavailable forever. Francesca's fate was sealed through methods that had been refined through experience with his previous subjects, but adapted to the specific challenges presented by her circumstances. The apparent accident that claimed her life occurred in Raffaello's workshop during what was supposed to be the completion of her wedding portrait, with witnesses present to confirm that her death resulted from a tragic mishap rather than deliberate action. The preservation of Francesca's beauty was accomplished under the most challenging conditions Raffaello had yet faced, requiring him to work quickly and efficiently while maintaining the facade of desperate attempts to save her life. Yet his techniques had become so refined that he was able to achieve results that exceeded even his work with Lucia, capturing not only Francesca's physical features, but the radiant joy that had made her face so luminous during the final portrait session. The investigation into Francesca's death was the most thorough that Raffaello had yet faced, conducted by authorities who recognized the significance of the loss and the need to provide her prominent family with complete answers about the circumstances of their daughter's fate. Yet, the evidence supported his account of events completely, while the obvious tragedy of losing such a perfect subject on the eve of completing his masterpiece convinced even skeptical observers of his innocence. The wedding portrait that was supposed to celebrate Francesca's marriage instead became her memorial, displayed at her funeral as a testament to the beauty that had been lost to such cruel accident. The sculpture possessed the same supernatural realism that characterized all of Raffaello's recent works, seeming to capture not just Francesca's appearance, but her very essence in ways that provided some comfort to her grieving family and friends. With 3 successful acquisitions completed, Raffaello's collection had begun to take on the character of a true gallery of preserved beauty. The hidden chambers beneath his workshop now contained elements from 3 of Florence's most extraordinary faces, each preserved through techniques that ensured their perfection would endure indefinitely. More importantly, the experience gained through these successful operations had refined his methods to the point where future acquisitions could be planned and executed with even greater confidence and efficiency. The transformation of Raffaello from conventional artist to systematic collector of beauty was now complete. He had proven that his preservation techniques could be applied successfully to subjects of varying backgrounds and circumstances, while his ability to create convincing deceptions and avoid detection had been tested under increasingly challenging conditions. The face collector had established his methods and begun building a collection that would eventually encompass the finest examples of feminine beauty his era could provide. Yet even as Raffaello celebrated his successes, he was becoming aware of subtle changes in Florence's social atmosphere that suggested his activities had not gone entirely unnoticed. Whispered conversations in artistic circles began to reference the unusual number of tragic accidents that had befallen beautiful young women who had worked with the city's most celebrated sculptor. While no direct accusations had been made, the pattern was becoming visible to those who chose to look for it. The challenge facing Raffaello as he planned future additions to his collection was to continue his work while managing the increasing risks that came with his growing reputation and the mounting coincidences surrounding his artistic relationships. His methods would need to become even more sophisticated, his deceptions even more convincing, and his selection criteria even more careful if he hoped to continue building his gallery of preserved perfection without attracting the kind of attention that could destroy everything he had accomplished. The face collector had successfully begun his life's work, transforming his workshop into a secret museum where beauty was preserved in its most perfect form. Yet the very success of his initial campaigns had created new challenges that would test all of his criminal ingenuity and artistic skill in the dangerous game of collecting faces, while avoiding detection by those who might begin to understand the true nature of his extraordinary sculptures. The Face Collector, Chapter 3. Art of Preservation. The success of Raffaello's first 3 acquisitions had elevated him to heights of artistic recognition that exceeded even his most ambitious dreams, yet also created circumstances that would make his future collecting activities both more profitable and more dangerous than ever before. Word of his extraordinary sculptures had spread beyond Florence's boundaries, attracting the attention of wealthy patrons throughout Italy who sought to commission works that would demonstrate both their refined taste and their ability to afford the services of the era's most celebrated artist. Among these distinguished admirers was Lorenzo de' Medici himself, whose patronage of the arts had made Florence the cultural center of Renaissance Europe. Lorenzo's interest in Raffaello's work was sparked by reports of sculptures so lifelike that they seemed to possess actual consciousness, combined with stories of tragic beauty preserved in marble with unprecedented emotional impact. The Medici prince's decision to meet personally with Florence's most acclaimed sculptor would create opportunities that Raffaello had never imagined, while also exposing him to scrutiny from someone whose intelligence and resources made him potentially the most dangerous observer he had yet encountered. The invitation to present his work to Lorenzo came through intermediaries who emphasized both the honor being extended and the expectations that such recognition entailed. Raffaello was asked to bring examples of his finest sculptures to the Medici Palace, where they would be evaluated not just for their artistic merit, but for their suitability as additions to one of Europe's most prestigious collections. The meeting would also provide an opportunity to discuss potential commissions that could establish Raffaello as the Medici family's preferred sculptor for projects of the highest importance. Raffaello's preparation for this crucial encounter required him to select works that would demonstrate his capabilities while concealing the true methods behind their extraordinary realism. He chose pieces that incorporated preserved elements from Caterina, Lucia, and Francesca, each representing different aspects of his evolving techniques. The sculptures were transported to the Medici palace under conditions that ensured their protection, while allowing Lorenzo to examine them under optimal lighting conditions. Lorenzo's reaction to Raffaello's work exceeded even the artist's optimistic expectations. The Medici prince was clearly moved by the emotional power of the sculptures, while being intellectually fascinated by the technical innovations that had made such unprecedented realism possible. His questions about Raffaello's methods were both sophisticated and persistent, reflecting the kind of analytical intelligence that had made him one of Renaissance Italy's most successful political leaders. What impressed Lorenzo most profoundly was the way Raffaello's sculptures seemed to capture not just physical appearance, but the essential character of their subjects. He observed that each work possessed a quality of presence that made viewers feel as though they were encountering the actual people who had inspired the pieces rather than simply admiring artistic representations of them. This supernatural realism, Lorenzo declared, represented a breakthrough in sculptural technique that would influence artistic development for generations to come. The commission that emerged from this meeting was the most significant of Raffaello's career to that point. Lorenzo requested a series of works celebrating the most beautiful women in Florence, sculptures that would serve as permanent testament to the city's role as a center of both artistic achievement and feminine perfection. The project would provide Raffaello with access to subjects of the highest quality while offering payments that would make him one of the wealthiest artists in Italy. More importantly for Raffaello's collecting activities, the Medici Commission provided legitimate justification for seeking out and studying Florence's most beautiful women under circumstances that would attract no suspicion. His role as Lorenzo's chosen artist would give him access to social circles and private settings that had previously been beyond his reach, while the prestigious nature of the project would ensure that potential subjects would be eager to cooperate with his artistic requirements. The first subject selected for the Medici series was Elena Ricci, a 20-year-old woman whose beauty had made her the inspiration for numerous poems and songs throughout Florence. Elena possessed the kind of classical perfection that seemed to embody ideal feminine beauty as described in ancient texts, with features so harmoniously proportioned that they appeared to have been designed by divine rather than natural forces. Her selection for inclusion in Lorenzo's project was viewed as both appropriate recognition of her extraordinary beauty and a significant honor for her merchant family. Elena's enthusiasm for participating in the Medici Commission was matched by her family's pride in their daughter's selection for such a distinguished project. The opportunity to be immortalized by Florence's greatest sculptor as part of a series celebrating the city's most beautiful women represented a form of recognition that would enhance their social status permanently. Elena herself was delighted at the prospect of working with an artist whose reputation extended throughout Europe, viewing the experience as an adventure that would provide memories to treasure for a lifetime. Raffaello's sessions with Elena were conducted in a special studio that had been prepared specifically for the Medici project, equipped with apparatus that allowed him to study his subjects with unprecedented precision while maintaining the comfortable and respectful atmosphere appropriate for working with women of distinguished backgrounds. The space was designed to impress visitors with its artistic sophistication while concealing the true purposes for which much of its equipment had been created. During the weeks that Elena posed for him, Raffaello studied her beauty with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized his work with previous subjects, though now his observations were conducted under the legitimizing umbrella of the most prestigious artistic commission in Florence. His documentation of her features was more detailed than ever before, encompassing not just physical characteristics, but psychological insights that would inform the preservation process. Elena's personality proved to be as captivating as her appearance, combining intelligence and wit with the kind of natural grace that made her seem almost otherworldly in her perfection. Her conversations with Raffaello during the modeling sessions revealed depths of character that enhanced her physical beauty, while her genuine interest in the artistic process made her an ideal collaborator in what she believed was the creation of conventional portrait sculpture. The method Raffaello developed for Elena's acquisition represented his most sophisticated approach to date, taking advantage of the extended timeline provided by the Medici Commission to create circumstances that would allow for perfect execution of his preservation techniques. Rather than relying on sudden accidents or deceptive excursions, he planned a gradual process that would culminate in Elena's permanent preservation while maintaining the fiction of ongoing artistic collaboration. The technique involved introducing Elena to substances that would slowly prepare her system for the preservation process, while creating symptoms that could be attributed to various common ailments. Raffaello's knowledge of chemistry and medicine, acquired through years of studying preservation methods, allowed him to manipulate Elena's health in ways that were both undetectable and ultimately fatal, while ensuring that her beauty would remain undiminished until the moment of preservation. Elena's gradual decline was carefully managed to appear as a mysterious illness that baffled Florence's medical practitioners while generating sympathy for both the suffering beauty and the devoted artist, who continued working with her despite her deteriorating condition. Raffaello's apparent determination to complete their artistic collaboration despite Elena's illness was viewed as evidence of his professional dedication and personal compassion, enhancing his reputation while providing perfect cover for his true activities. The preservation of Elena's beauty was accomplished under ideal conditions that allowed Raffaello to achieve results that surpassed even his work with Francesca. His refined techniques captured not only her physical perfection, but subtle aspects of her personality that had made her face so extraordinarily captivating during life. The success of this preservation confirmed his growing mastery of methods that could extract and maintain beauty in its most perfect form. Elena's death was attributed to consumption, a diagnosis that explained both her gradual decline and the tragic loss of someone so young and beautiful. Her funeral was attended by much of Florence's elite, who mourned the passing of someone whose beauty had inspired so many works of art. Raffaello's eulogy for her was particularly moving, as he spoke of the privilege of immortalizing her beauty during her final months and his determination to ensure that future generations would be able to appreciate the perfection that death had claimed too early. The memorial sculpture that resulted from Elena's preservation was acclaimed as Raffaello's masterpiece, surpassing even his previous achievements in both technical excellence and emotional impact. The work seemed to capture Elena's very soul, creating such a powerful sense of presence that many observers claimed to feel as though she were actually looking at them through the marble. Lorenzo de' Medici himself declared it the finest sculpture he had ever encountered, worthy of placement in the most honored location within his collection. The success of Elena's memorial enhanced Raffaello's reputation to levels that attracted attention from throughout Europe. Wealthy collectors began competing for the opportunity to commission works from an artist whose abilities seemed to transcend normal human limitations, while other artists sought to understand the techniques that had made such unprecedented realism possible. Yet none suspected that Raffaello's extraordinary results came not from superior artistic skill alone, but from methods that preserved actual beauty rather than simply representing it. The second subject selected for the Medici series was Giulia Farnese, whose beauty was renowned not just in Florence but throughout the Italian peninsula. At 19 years old, she possessed a combination of physical perfection and aristocratic bearing that made her seem like a goddess who had descended to earth to demonstrate the heights that human beauty could achieve. Her inclusion in Lorenzo's project was considered essential, as no celebration of feminine perfection could be complete without preserving her extraordinary features for posterity. Giulia's participation in the Medici Commission was facilitated by her family's political connections and their recognition that association with such a prestigious project would enhance their social position throughout Italy. Her own enthusiasm for working with Raffaello was motivated partly by artistic interest and partly by the understanding that the resulting sculpture would serve as a permanent testament to her beauty long after time had claimed its natural splendor. The sessions between Raffaello and Giulia were conducted with even greater ceremony than his work with Elena, reflecting her higher social status and the increased attention that the Medici project was attracting from Florence's cultural elite. Distinguished visitors often observed portions of the creative process, requiring Raffaello to maintain perfect professionalism while conducting the detailed studies necessary for his ultimate purposes. Giulia's personality proved to be as remarkable as her appearance, combining intelligence and sophistication with a natural warmth that made her universally beloved by those who encountered her. Her conversations with Raffaello revealed not only her understanding of artistic principles, but her philosophical insights into the nature of beauty and its relationship to human experience. These discussions provided Raffaello with psychological understanding that would enhance the preservation process, while also creating genuine appreciation for the extraordinary individual he was planning to acquire. The method Raffaello developed for Giulia's preservation was his most ambitious to date, taking advantage of her aristocratic lifestyle to create circumstances that would provide optimal conditions for implementing his techniques. Rather than relying on illness or accidents, he planned a scenario involving travel to artistic locations outside Florence, where she could be preserved under ideal conditions while maintaining the fiction of continued collaboration on the Medici project. The excursion that would seal Giulia's fate was presented as an opportunity to study classical sculptures in locations where ancient artists had achieved their greatest works, emphasizing that such research was essential for creating pieces worthy of inclusion in Lorenzo's collection. Giulia's enthusiasm for this artistic pilgrimage was enhanced by Raffaello's descriptions of the insights such travel could provide. While her family's approval was secured through emphasis on the cultural education such experiences would offer, the villa, where Giulia met her end, had been prepared specifically for the most sophisticated preservation techniques Raffaello had yet attempted. The location provided complete privacy while being equipped with apparatus that represented the culmination of years of research into methods for capturing and maintaining human beauty. The preservation of Giulia's extraordinary features was accomplished under conditions that allowed Raffaello to achieve results that exceeded all of his previous work. Giulia's disappearance was explained through a carefully constructed account of brigands who had attacked their traveling party, claiming her life, while Raffaello barely escaped with the precious sculptures that represented the culmination of their artistic collaboration. The investigation into this incident was thorough but ultimately accepted his version of events, particularly given the obvious value of the works he had managed to preserve despite the tragic circumstances. The memorial sculpture that honored Giulia's memory was unveiled with ceremony appropriate to both her aristocratic status and the significance of the artistic achievement she had inspired. The work possessed such extraordinary realism and emotional power that viewers often wept upon first seeing it, while the technical innovations it displayed influenced artistic development throughout Italy. Lorenzo de' Medici declared it a treasure that would honor his collection for centuries to come. Yet even as Raffaello celebrated these artistic triumphs, troubling signs were beginning to suggest that his activities had attracted unwanted attention from individuals whose suspicions could prove dangerous to his continued operations. Marco Benedetti, a young scholar whose studies of Florentine artistic history had led him to analyze patterns in recent cultural developments, had begun noticing correlations between Raffaello's greatest successes and the tragic deaths of the beautiful women who had served as his subjects. Marco's investigation began as an academic exercise intended to document the relationship between artistic achievement and the personal tragedies that often inspired great works. However, his analysis of timing, circumstances, and statistical probabilities had revealed patterns that suggested something far more sinister than mere coincidence. The frequency with which Raffaello's subjects met untimely ends, combined with the unprecedented realism of the memorial works that honored their memories, created questions that demanded more serious investigation. The young scholar's suspicions were further aroused by his discovery that several of the women who had died while working with Raffaello had reported feeling unwell during their final sessions, experiencing symptoms that seemed to have no clear medical cause. While these complaints had been attributed to various common ailments at the time, their pattern suggested the possibility of deliberate poisoning or other forms of systematic harm. Marco's decision to share his suspicions with appropriate authorities was motivated by genuine concern for the safety of other beautiful women who might become targets for whatever forces had claimed the lives of Raffaello's previous subjects. His presentation of evidence was methodical and persuasive, focusing on statistical analysis and documented correlations rather than speculation or emotional appeals. The investigation that resulted from Marco's accusations would represent the most serious threat Raffaello had yet faced, conducted by individuals whose intelligence and resources exceeded anything he had previously encountered. Yet his reputation for artistic genius and his connections to powerful patrons like Lorenzo de' Medici provided protection that might allow him to survive even systematic scrutiny of his methods and activities. As the third phase of Raffaello's career as the face collector reached its climax, he found himself in a position that was simultaneously more powerful and more vulnerable than ever before. His artistic achievements had placed him beyond the reach of ordinary suspicion, while his growing collection represented the successful preservation of 5 of Florence's most extraordinary faces. Yet the very success of his operations had created patterns that might eventually be recognized by those intelligent enough to understand their true significance. The challenge facing Raffaello was to continue building his collection while managing the increasing risks that came with enhanced scrutiny from both admirers and potential enemies. His methods would need to become even more sophisticated, his selections even more careful, and his deceptions even more convincing if he hoped to achieve his ultimate goal of creating the most comprehensive collection of preserved beauty the world had ever known. The face collector had reached the height of his artistic powers and criminal capabilities, but now he would need to prove that his genius extended to survival in circumstances where his very success had made him a target for those who might finally understand the true nature of his extraordinary achievements. The game had become more complex and dangerous, but the stakes, the preservation of perfect beauty for eternity, remained worth any risk he might be required to accept. The investigation, launched by Marco Benedetti's accusations, had created an atmosphere of subtle tension throughout Florence's artistic community, yet Raffaello's response to this developing threat demonstrated the same calculating intelligence that had made his previous collecting campaigns successful. Rather than retreating from public view or reducing his activities, he chose to accelerate his timeline while pursuing the most ambitious acquisition of his entire career, a subject whose beauty was so extraordinary that her preservation would serve as the ultimate vindication of his life's work. Isabella Romano had arrived in Florence as part of a diplomatic mission from the Papal States, her father serving as an envoy whose negotiations with the Medici required extended residence in the city. At 17 years old, she possessed a beauty that transcended normal human limitations, combining physical perfection with an ethereal quality that made her appear almost supernatural in her loveliness. Her face embodied every ideal that Renaissance artists had sought to capture in their works, while possessing individual characteristics that made her unique among even the most beautiful women of her generation. Isabella's beauty was not simply a matter of harmonious features or flawless complexion, though she possessed both in abundance. Her true distinction lay in the way light seemed to interact with her face, creating subtle effects that changed with different angles and illumination, while never diminishing the overall impact of her extraordinary loveliness. Her expressions carried emotional depths that suggested profound intelligence and sensitivity, while her bearing combined aristocratic dignity with natural grace that made every movement appear choreographed by divine hands. From the moment Raffaello first observed Isabella at a diplomatic reception hosted by Lorenzo de' Medici, he recognized that she represented the ultimate challenge and opportunity for his collecting activities. Her beauty was of such transcendent quality that its preservation would justify any risks involved in its acquisition, while her diplomatic status and aristocratic connections made her the most dangerous target he had ever considered pursuing. Yet the very magnitude of these challenges made her irresistible to someone whose entire career had been built on successfully overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. Raffaello's approach to Isabella required strategies that surpassed anything he had previously attempted in their sophistication and complexity. Her prominent position and constant supervision by diplomatic guards made direct access extremely difficult, while her intelligence and education created the possibility that she might recognize the true nature of his intentions before he could implement his preservation techniques. Most significantly, her disappearance would attract investigation from authorities whose resources and determination exceeded anything he had previously faced. The method Raffaello developed for gaining access to Isabella exploited the very diplomatic circumstances that made her so well protected. He convinced Lorenzo de' Medici to commission a portrait of the papal envoy's daughter as a gesture of respect for the ongoing negotiations, emphasizing that such a work would demonstrate Florence's appreciation for the cultural treasures that Rome had sent to their city. The commission would provide legitimate justification for extended private sessions while creating a masterpiece that would enhance diplomatic relations between the two states. Lorenzo's enthusiasm for this proposal was enhanced by Raffaello's reputation for creating works of unprecedented beauty and emotional impact. The Medici prince recognized that a portrait of Isabella by Florence's greatest sculptor would serve multiple purposes, honoring their distinguished guests, demonstrating Florentine artistic superiority, and adding an extraordinary piece to his collection. The diplomatic benefits of the gesture made it impossible for Isabella's father to refuse without seeming discourteous to his hosts. Isabella's initial response to the portrait commission was characterized by the polite cooperation appropriate to her diplomatic position, though her private feelings about the arrangement were more complex. She had heard stories about Raffaello's extraordinary artistic abilities, but also whispered rumors about the tragic fates that had befallen several of his previous subjects. While she dismissed such gossip as typical of the superstitious thinking that surrounded exceptional talent, she maintained a subtle weariness that would prove crucial to her ultimate survival. The early sessions between Raffaello and Isabella were conducted under the formal protocols appropriate for diplomatic interactions, with guards and chaperones maintaining constant supervision to ensure that proper decorum was observed throughout the artistic process. These constraints made it impossible for Raffaello to implement his usual methods of detailed study and gradual conditioning, requiring him to develop new approaches that could function within the restricted circumstances. Yet even under such challenging conditions, Raffaello succeeded in documenting Isabella's extraordinary beauty with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized his previous work. His notebooks from this period reveal an obsessive attention to detail that went far beyond normal artistic requirements, encompassing measurements, color analyses, and structural studies that provided a complete blueprint for preservation. More significantly, they document his growing recognition that Isabella possessed qualities that made her not just beautiful, but genuinely perfect in ways that transcended human limitations. Isabella's awareness of Raffaello's intense scrutiny created discomfort that grew stronger with each passing session. While she maintained the gracious demeanor appropriate to her position, she began to notice aspects of the sculptor's behavior that seemed to exceed normal artistic interest. His questions about her daily routines, her health, and her personal preferences appeared unrelated to the creation of conventional portrait sculpture, while the intensity of his observation made her feel like a specimen being studied rather than a subject being honored through art. More disturbing still were the subtle changes Isabella began experiencing in her own physical condition during the weeks of portrait sessions. She developed periodic headaches that had no apparent cause, experienced occasional dizziness that made her feel disoriented, and noticed that her usual energy levels seemed to fluctuate unpredictably. While these symptoms were mild enough to be dismissed as effects of the diplomatic pressures her family faced, their timing corresponded exactly with her exposure to Raffaello's workshop environment. Isabella's growing suspicions about the portrait sessions were reinforced by information she gathered through discreet inquiries about Raffaello's previous subjects. Her position within Florence's diplomatic community provided access to social circles where the tragic fates of beautiful women who had worked with the city's most celebrated sculptor were discussed with increasing concern. The pattern of deaths that had followed Raffaello's greatest artistic achievements created questions that diplomatic training had taught her to take seriously. The revelation that confirmed Isabella's worst fears came through her discovery of Raffaello's hidden chambers during a portrait session when she had been left briefly alone in his workshop. Her exploration of the building, motivated by curiosity about the strange sounds she had been hearing, led her to areas that were normally kept secured from visitors. What she found in those concealed spaces challenged her understanding of both human nature and the boundaries between art and atrocity. The hidden chambers contained evidence of preservation techniques that went far beyond conventional sculpture, including apparatus designed for extracting and maintaining organic materials through methods that Isabella recognized as fundamentally incompatible with the continued existence of their sources. More horrifying still were the containers that held preserved elements from previous subjects, each labeled with names that corresponded to women whose deaths had been attributed to various accidents and illnesses. Isabella's realization of her mortal danger was accompanied by the understanding that escape from Raffaello's workshop would require not only physical flight, but also the kind of strategic deception that her diplomatic training had prepared her to attempt. Her position as the daughter of a papal envoy provided certain protections, but only if she could reach safety before Raffaello discovered that his true intentions had been exposed. The confrontation that erupted when Raffaello discovered Isabella examining his hidden chambers represented the first time in his career that an intended subject had gained complete knowledge of his methods and purposes before their implementation. Her accusations forced him to abandon the careful deceptions that had characterized all his previous operations, while her obvious intelligence and determination made it clear that she would not be susceptible to the psychological manipulation that had proven so effective with other targets. Raffaello's response to this crisis demonstrated the ruthless pragmatism that had made his criminal career successful. Rather than attempting to continue his elaborate deceptions, he chose to reveal the full scope of his activities while explaining the philosophical principles that justified his methods. His presentation of the preservation process as a form of artistic immortalization was delivered with genuine conviction, reflecting his sincere belief that his work served purposes that transcended conventional moral limitations. Isabella's reaction to Raffaello's revelations combined horror with the kind of analytical thinking that diplomatic training had developed within her. She recognized that his artistic genius was genuine and that his preservation techniques represented genuine innovations in the relationship between art and science. Yet she also understood that his methods required the systematic murder of innocence, and that his philosophical justifications were sophisticated forms of self-deception designed to permit unconscionable behavior. The intellectual duel that developed between Isabella and Raffaello as he prepared to implement his preservation techniques was notable for its philosophical sophistication and psychological complexity. Each participant possessed exceptional intelligence and education, while their debate encompassed fundamental questions about the nature of beauty, the value of individual life, and the relationship between artistic achievement and moral responsibility. Isabella's arguments focused on the inherent worth of human consciousness and the impossibility of preserving true beauty through methods that destroyed its living source. She contended that Raffaello's techniques could capture only superficial appearance while missing the essential qualities that made faces genuinely beautiful, the animation, expressiveness, and spiritual vitality that could exist only in living beings. Raffaello's response emphasized the temporary nature of all mortal beauty and the tragic loss that occurred when extraordinary faces were allowed to decay through natural processes. He argued that his preservation methods rescued perfect beauty from inevitable destruction, ensuring that future generations could appreciate perfection that would otherwise be lost forever. His techniques, he claimed, represented the ultimate form of artistic service, elevating beauty beyond the limitations of mortality. The philosophical debate might have continued indefinitely, but practical considerations forced Raffaello to begin implementing his preservation procedures despite Isabella's continued resistance. Her knowledge of his methods made it impossible to maintain the fiction that she was participating voluntarily in conventional artistic creation, while her obvious determination to escape made immediate action necessary to prevent the loss of the most extraordinary subject he had ever encountered. Yet Isabella's preparation for this confrontation included more than philosophical arguments and moral appeals. Her diplomatic training had taught her to analyze dangerous situations systematically and to prepare multiple options for dealing with threats to her security. The exploration that had revealed Raffaello's hidden chambers had also provided her with knowledge of the workshop's layout and the location of potential escape routes that might provide opportunities for flight. The escape attempt that Isabella launched during the critical moments when Raffaello was preparing his preservation apparatus demonstrated both courage and tactical intelligence that exceeded his expectations for someone of her age and background. Her diversionary tactics created confusion that provided the opportunity to reach areas of the workshop where she could access routes leading to the outside world, while her knowledge of Florence's diplomatic quarter gave her specific destinations where she could find protection. Yet Raffaello's response to Isabella's escape attempt revealed resources and capabilities that she had not anticipated during her planning. His criminal career had required the development of contingency plans for exactly such scenarios, while his network of associates provided assistance that could track and intercept fleeing subjects even after they had escaped from his immediate control. The pursuit that followed Isabella's flight from the workshop became a deadly game of strategy and evasion that tested both participants' intelligence, determination, and resources. Isabella's advantages included her knowledge of diplomatic protocols, her access to official protection, and her understanding of Florence's political landscape. Raffaello's strengths encompassed his familiarity with the city's hidden spaces, his criminal network, and his willingness to employ methods that Isabella's moral constraints prevented her from considering. The chase through Florence's narrow streets and ancient buildings provided Isabella with opportunities to demonstrate the courage and resourcefulness that diplomatic training had developed within her. Her evasion techniques combined physical agility with psychological insight, using her understanding of human behavior to misdirect pursuit while seeking routes toward sanctuary that would provide protection from Raffaello's continued threats. Yet even as Isabella struggled to reach safety, the broader implications of her escape were creating consequences that would affect not only her immediate survival, but the future of Raffaello's entire criminal enterprise. Her knowledge of his methods and her obvious determination to expose his activities represented threats that could destroy everything he had accomplished during his career as the face collector. Marco Benedetti's investigation, which had been proceeding slowly through official channels, suddenly gained crucial support when Isabella managed to reach the papal embassy and provide testimony that confirmed his suspicions about Raffaello's activities. Her detailed account of the hidden chambers, the preservation apparatus, and the evidence of systematic murder provided the kind of concrete proof that had been missing from previous attempts to build a case against Florence's most celebrated sculptor. The combination of Marco's analytical research and Isabella's direct testimony created an investigative momentum that Raffaello's political connections and artistic reputation could not deflect. Authorities who had previously dismissed accusations against such a distinguished figure were forced to take serious action when confronted with evidence that could not be explained away through alternative narratives. The search of Raffaello's workshop, conducted by officials who now possessed detailed knowledge of what they were seeking, uncovered the complete scope of his preservation activities and revealed the fate of every beautiful woman who had disappeared during his rise to artistic prominence. The hidden chambers yielded evidence that confirmed the systematic nature of his crimes while demonstrating the sophisticated methods he had developed for avoiding detection. Yet, even as investigators documented the extent of Raffaello's criminal activities, the man himself had disappeared from Florence, taking with him the most precious elements of his collection and leaving behind only the conventional sculptures that had established his public reputation. His escape had been planned and executed with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized all his previous operations, ensuring that his most important work would survive even if his freedom could not be maintained. The investigation that followed Raffaello's disappearance revealed the true scope of his activities and confirmed that his artistic achievements had been built upon the systematic murder of Florence's most beautiful women. Yet it also demonstrated that his preservation techniques had indeed succeeded in maintaining beauty in forms that transcended normal artistic representation, raising disturbing questions about the relationship between extraordinary achievement and unconscionable methods. Isabella's survival and testimony had prevented Raffaello from completing his collection with the addition of her extraordinary beauty, while also exposing the criminal enterprise that had operated behind the facade of artistic genius. Her courage and intelligence had saved not only her own life, but also the lives of future women who might have become targets for someone whose appreciation of beauty had transformed into the most sophisticated and dangerous form of predation Florence had ever encountered. Yet even as authorities celebrated the exposure of the face collector and the prevention of future crimes, troubling questions remained about the fate of the preserved elements he had taken with him, and the possibility that his techniques might be applied elsewhere by someone whose criminal ambitions matched his own. The case had been solved and immediate dangers had been eliminated, but the broader implications of what Raffaello had accomplished would continue to influence understanding of the relationship between art and morality for generations to come. The fourth phase of Raffaello's career had ended not in triumph, but in exposure and flight, yet his legacy would endure in forms that no conventional artist had ever achieved. The face collector had been defeated, but his work would survive as testament to both human genius and human evil, raising questions that would challenge moral philosophy long after his personal fate had been forgotten. The manhunt that followed Raffaello's disappearance from Florence represented one of the most extensive criminal investigations in Renaissance Italy's history, involving authorities from multiple city-states and reaching into the highest levels of political and religious hierarchy. Yet the quarry they sought had vanished with the thoroughness of someone whose criminal career had required meticulous planning for exactly such circumstances, leaving behind only questions about where he had gone and whether his preservation techniques might be applied to new victims in whatever sanctuary he had found. Isabella Romano's recovery from her harrowing experience was closely monitored by both medical practitioners and diplomatic officials who recognized that her testimony would be crucial to understanding the full scope of Raffaello's crimes. Her detailed accounts of the hidden chambers, the preservation apparatus, and the evidence of systematic murder provided investigators with their first comprehensive picture of activities that had operated behind the facade of artistic genius for nearly a decade. Yet even as Isabella cooperated fully with the investigation, she was haunted by memories of her confrontation with someone whose intelligence and artistic abilities were matched only by his complete absence of moral constraint. Her diplomatic training had exposed her to many forms of human evil, but nothing had prepared her for encountering someone whose philosophical sophistication was employed to justify the systematic murder of innocents for the sake of preserving their beauty in perverted forms of artistic immortality. Marco Benedetti's vindication through Isabella's testimony brought him recognition as someone whose analytical insights had successfully identified patterns that more experienced investigators had missed, yet the young scholar found little satisfaction in being proven correct about such horrific matters. His academic research into artistic achievement and personal tragedy had uncovered evidence of crimes that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between genius and morality. The search of Raffaello's workshop, conducted with knowledge provided by Isabella's exploration of the hidden chambers, revealed the complete infrastructure of an operation that had combined artistic creation with systematic murder on a scale that exceeded anything previously documented in criminal history. The preservation apparatus demonstrated technical sophistication that impressed even its discoverers, while the evidence of multiple victims confirmed that Raffaello's crimes extended far beyond the cases that had initially attracted suspicion. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that Raffaello's conventional sculptures, the works that had established his reputation throughout Europe, incorporated preserved elements from his victims in ways that no observer had ever suspected. The extraordinary realism that had made these pieces so celebrated was revealed to be the result not of superior artistic skill alone, but of techniques that literally incorporated actual human beauty into marble surfaces. The revelation that Florence's most honored artistic treasures contained preserved remnants of murdered women created a crisis that extended far beyond simple criminal investigation into questions of cultural identity and moral responsibility. Lorenzo de' Medici himself was forced to confront the reality that his patronage had unknowingly supported activities that represented the antithesis of everything Renaissance culture claimed to celebrate. Yet the most shocking discovery awaited investigators when they penetrated the deepest levels of Raffaello's workshop and found what could only be described as a secret museum of preserved beauty. The chamber contained dozens of specimens that demonstrated the evolution of his preservation techniques, from crude early experiments to sophisticated methods that had achieved unprecedented success in maintaining human beauty in permanent forms. Each specimen was labeled with meticulous care, documenting not only the identity of its source, but detailed information about the circumstances of acquisition and the specific techniques employed in preservation. The records revealed that Raffaello's crimes extended back further than anyone had suspected, encompassing victims whose disappearances had never been connected to his activities because their deaths had occurred before his rise to public prominence. The preserved elements themselves displayed levels of technical achievement that forced even the most horrified observers to acknowledge the genuine scientific advances that Raffaello's research had produced. His methods for maintaining organic materials had overcome challenges that had frustrated natural philosophers for centuries, while his understanding of chemical processes had enabled innovations that could have revolutionized multiple fields of study if applied to legitimate purposes. The investigation expanded beyond Florence, as authorities in other Italian city-states began re-examining suspicious deaths and disappearances that might be connected to Raffaello's activities. His reputation as a traveling artist had provided opportunities to operate in multiple locations, while his network of contacts throughout Italy's cultural community had given him access to potential victims in cities where his methods were unknown to local investigators. The evidence gathered during this expanded investigation revealed that Raffaello's career as the face collector had encompassed at least 15 confirmed victims, with strong suspicions about additional cases that could not be definitively proven due to the passage of time and the destruction of evidence. The systematic nature of his crimes and the sophistication of his methods marked him as one of history's most accomplished serial killers, operating under cover of artistic genius that had made him virtually above suspicion. Yet even as the investigation documented the extent of Raffaello's crimes, the man himself remained beyond the reach of justice, having vanished so completely that some observers wondered whether he had fallen victim to his own preservation techniques or had met his end through other means during his flight from Florence. The possibility that he continued to operate elsewhere under a different identity created ongoing concerns about the safety of beautiful women throughout Italy and beyond. The discovery of Raffaello's activities had profound implications for Florence's cultural community, forcing artists, patrons, and critics to re-examine fundamental assumptions about the relationship between artistic achievement and moral character. The revelation that extraordinary beauty in art could be achieved through methods that destroyed actual beauty in life created philosophical challenges that would influence Renaissance thinking for generations to come. Lorenzo de' Medici's response to the crisis demonstrated both personal horror at having unknowingly supported such activities and political sophistication in managing the broader implications for Florence's reputation as a center of cultural achievement. His decision to preserve Raffaello's conventional sculptures while destroying the hidden preservation apparatus reflected careful consideration of how to acknowledge the crimes while protecting the city's artistic heritage. The fate of Raffaello's preserved specimens became one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. While most observers demanded their immediate destruction as evidence of unspeakable crimes, others argued that the specimens represented unique scientific achievements that could provide valuable insights into preservation techniques with legitimate applications. The debate encompassed legal, moral, and practical considerations that had no clear precedents in criminal or cultural history. The resolution of this controversy came through compromise that satisfied no one completely, but addressed the most pressing concerns of all interested parties. The preserved specimens were transferred to a secure facility where they could be studied by qualified researchers while being protected from public display or inappropriate use. Access was strictly controlled and limited to investigations that might contribute to legitimate scientific advancement. Yet even this careful compromise could not address the deeper questions raised by Raffaello's activities about the nature of beauty and its preservation. His techniques had succeeded in maintaining human loveliness in forms that transcended normal artistic representation, creating works that possessed qualities of life and presence that conventional sculpture could never achieve. The destruction of such achievements, regardless of the criminal methods that had produced them, represented losses to human knowledge that could never be recovered. The trial that authorities hoped would provide final resolution to the case could not proceed without the defendant, leaving many questions unanswered and many victims' families without the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The extensive evidence of Raffaello's crimes provided clear proof of his guilt, but the absence of legal proceedings meant that his activities could never be officially condemned through proper judicial process. The investigation's final report, compiled after months of research and analysis, presented a comprehensive account of Raffaello's criminal career that would serve as the definitive record of one of history's most unusual and disturbing cases. The document detailed not only his methods and victims, but also the broader implications of his activities for understanding the relationship between artistic genius and criminal behavior. Yet even as authorities closed their official investigation, troubling reports began emerging from other regions of Italy about artists whose work displayed the same supernatural realism that had characterized Raffaello's sculptures. While none of these reports could be definitively connected to the missing face collector, they created ongoing concerns about whether his techniques might be spreading to other practitioners, or whether he had established new operations in locations where his identity remained unknown. The legacy of Raffaello's crimes extended far beyond their immediate impact on his victims and their families, to influence the development of artistic appreciation and critical evaluation throughout Renaissance culture. The revelation that extraordinary realism could be achieved through incorporation of actual human elements led to increased scrutiny of works that displayed unusual verisimilitude, while creating new approaches to understanding the relationship between art and reality. The preserved specimens, despite being secured from public access, continued to influence scientific understanding of preservation techniques and their potential applications. Researchers who were granted permission to study these materials made discoveries that advanced knowledge in multiple fields, though the ethical implications of benefiting from research based on murder victims remained subjects of ongoing debate. The case also established new precedents for criminal investigation of activities that combined conventional crimes with scientific or artistic innovation. Raffaello's methods had required authorities to develop new approaches to evidence collection and analysis, while his use of legitimate cultural activities as cover for criminal behavior created awareness of potential threats that had not previously been recognized. Yet perhaps the most significant aspect of Raffaello's legacy was the way his activities had transformed understanding of beauty itself and its relationship to mortality. His preservation techniques had proven that human loveliness could indeed be maintained indefinitely through sufficiently sophisticated methods, raising questions about whether conventional artistic representation was adequate for capturing and preserving the most extraordinary examples of physical perfection. The philosophical implications of these discoveries continued to influence Renaissance thought long after the immediate crisis had passed. The demonstration that beauty could be literally preserved, rather than simply represented, challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between art and life, while creating new possibilities for thinking about immortality and its various forms. The empty workshop that had once housed Raffaello's operations was eventually converted into a memorial for his victims, though the installation carefully avoided any reference to the preservation techniques that had made their murders possible. The memorial emphasized their individual qualities and accomplishments, while providing a place where their families and friends could honor their memories without being reminded of the horrible circumstances of their deaths. Yet in a supreme irony that Raffaello himself might have appreciated, his greatest artistic triumph came not during his criminal career, but after his disappearance, when the conventional sculptures he had created began to be recognized as masterpieces that transcended normal artistic achievement. The works that had incorporated preserved elements from his victims displayed qualities of beauty and presence that influenced artistic development for generations, establishing his reputation as one of Renaissance Italy's greatest sculptors despite knowledge of his criminal methods. Lorenzo de' Medici's decision to maintain these sculptures in his collection, while acknowledging their creators' crimes, reflected recognition that the works themselves possessed value independent of their creators' moral character. The pieces served as permanent testimony to both human genius and human evil, raising questions about whether extraordinary art could be separated from the circumstances of its creation. The debate over whether Raffaello's sculptures should be preserved or destroyed continued for decades after his disappearance, encompassing fundamental questions about the relationship between aesthetic value and moral consideration. The works themselves seem to argue for their own preservation through their extraordinary beauty and technical achievement, yet their connection to systematic murder created ongoing discomfort for those who encountered them. The resolution of this debate came through time rather than conscious decision, as the sculptures gradually became accepted as legitimate artistic treasures whose origins, while disturbing, did not diminish their cultural value. Future generations would appreciate them as extraordinary examples of Renaissance achievement, while remaining aware of the crimes that had made their creation possible. In the end, Raffaello Visconti achieved a form of immortality that exceeded anything his preservation techniques could have provided for his victims. His name became permanently associated with both extraordinary artistic achievement and horrific criminal behavior, ensuring that his story would be remembered and studied for centuries to come. The face collector had indeed succeeded in preserving beauty for eternity, though not in the forms he had originally intended. The final irony of his career was that his greatest preservation achievement was not the maintenance of individual faces through criminal techniques, but the creation of artistic works that would endure long after all traces of his victims' physical beauty had been lost to time. The sculptures that incorporated their preserved essence became monuments not only to his genius, but to their memory, ensuring that their beauty would inspire future generations even though their names and individual stories were forgotten. The gallery of beauty that Raffaello had sought to create through systematic murder had indeed been established, but in forms that transcended his original vision. His preserved specimens were secured in scientific facilities where they contributed to legitimate research, while his conventional sculptures were displayed in museums and collections throughout Europe, where they continued to demonstrate the heights that artistic achievement could reach. Yet questions remained about whether such extraordinary beauty justified the methods that had produced it, and whether society should benefit from discoveries made through unconscionable means. These ethical dilemmas would continue to challenge moral philosophers and cultural critics for generations, ensuring that the face collector's legacy would extend far beyond the boundaries of criminal history into fundamental questions about the nature of human achievement and its proper evaluation. The workshop that had once housed the most sophisticated criminal enterprise in Renaissance history stood empty, its hidden chambers sealed and its apparatus destroyed, yet the influence of what had occurred there continued to shape understanding of art, beauty, and morality throughout the cultural world. Raffaello Visconti had succeeded in his ultimate goal of preserving beauty for eternity, though the forms his success had taken exceeded anything he could have imagined during his career as the face collector. His story served as both warning and inspiration, demonstrating the heights that human genius could achieve, while illustrating the depths to which it could descend when unconstrained by moral consideration. The face collector had claimed his final victory not through the preservation of individual beauty, but through the creation of questions that would endure as long as human beings struggled to understand the relationship between achievement and virtue, between art and life, between beauty and the terrible prices that some were willing to pay to possess it forever.